sunny Saturday. I'm sure we will rather be somewhere else on a walk, but we have important topics to discuss today. So this is part of the podcast for Cyber Salon for RSA. So I'm Eva Pascoe. I'm the co-founder of the world's first internet cafe back in the 90s. So partially responsible for this technology mess that we found ourselves in. And today I'm in the capacity of chair of Cyber Salon, digital think tank, which commissioned a book a couple of years ago, which only just came out. Just goes to show how long the books take to produce. And it's a book about impact of technology on law, policing, courts, but also other areas. Today we have three guests who are experts on the topic. And we just wanted to bottom out a little bit more in detail. What do we think this technology will do? Are we going to be safer? Is our sentencing going to be more fair? Are biases going to disappear from the system? So all these questions that OpenAI is promising, will they materialize? But let me just introduce everybody today. So maybe start from Trevor. So Trevor Burke is barrister with TRB, and he's been in the business of law for a few decades, shall I say, focusing on the sharp end of it. So high-profile murder cases, money laundering, and everywhere where the criminals love to be. And he was kindly supporting our book as an expert, read the stories from the writers, worked with the writers on the speculative fiction stories, and I think ended up with teaching us more than he has learned himself, but it was a very interesting process. So thank you, Trevor. Joanna Goodman, she is a journalist on the Law Gazette and many other publications related to law. But really you are a technology specialist, right? You wrote a book about the robots and in law. And have been following the scene for quite a long time with very sharp eye and commenting on various promises that they never got fulfilled from our favorite technologists. So welcome, Joanna. And Diane Palmer from College of Policing. So Diane is very much on the cutting edge of technology, AI, and practice of policing. So you've been in that area for a long time as well, right? Over 20 years. So I think between us, we have decades, and let's hope we can make things a little bit clear for everybody. Right, so can I ask you a question first, maybe starting from Diane. So when did you first come across AI and technology in your work? Where do you remember the first occurrence?
I suppose the thought of it initially was going back decades, where you watch movies or you got people exploring ideas around it and you think maybe this might be a possibility one day. But I think suddenly before you realize it, it's almost here that some of this AI technology is beyond, is not too far. It almost is happening. So, in the last few years, you've seen AI develop quite hugely, where you're actually able to use AI to do something. So from the idea of it being a speculative conception to now being something real and actually developing at such a pace. So yeah, we're doing things with it now and exploring it, but also realizing how scary it could be. It can actually be in the future.
Yes, I think it's the speed of that has surprised everybody. So I think that's maybe the same question to Joanna. I obviously have been looking at AI and law technologies and technologies in law for quite a long time. And you wrote the book in 2016, which was quite sort of sharp. At that point, people were still mapping out. What made you think about the book, and where did you think the need that this is happening and I need to be serious about it?
Well, thank you for having me. I'd say first, the first things that I thought about it is I've always liked science fiction. So it's always been in the movies, and right back to Space Odyssey and HAL and all the way back to 100 years ago, Metropolis. So it's always been in the movies. I discovered it in legal when I was writing a column for The Guardian for the media and tech page, and I wrote a lot about AI, and I was obsessing with it. And I met somebody who introduced me to a technology vendor called at the time Raven, and they were the first legal AI. And I actually met them when they were still sort of a startup. And I saw it, and I saw it read all the documents. And I thought, oh, this is the future, because it was sifting through documents at amazing speed. So I wrote an article about it and said, this is the future of legal. We're going to have robots reading through everything. And I got a lot of really nasty feedback saying what rubbish. And, you know, I was an attention-seeking person, and it's because I wasn't any good at writing or whatever. And I thought, well, either I shut up or I write a whole book about it. So I went for the book. And so I went and interviewed all the early legal AI vendors and developers and talked to them. And since then, there's only one actually that hasn't been bought out or closed, which is Luminance. And it does exactly what that first vendor did. It's a software engine that reads through documents and finds things. And now it does contract review, and you can use it as a negotiation platform. It's one of many. So that was from the legal side. From the policing side, I mean, even when I'd written my book, I can't remember when the Compass case was, where the algorithm was predicting recidivism in the US. And I see here it was 2016, which is when I was again working on my book. And that was kind of using an AI to decide on whether to give somebody bail or not. And basically they had done something, but they challenged the fact that a robot was going to send them to prison potentially, which obviously it wasn't. But then that goes straight back to science fiction, because that's what Judge Dredd was doing, wasn't it? So really, I guess I look to the movies for inspiration and to the software for what's happening.
Yeah, and I guess it was iterative, because then the script writers were reading your book, and it's like, oh, why don't we go further? So if I can take us to Trevor. So on your end, things probably are moving now, but if with more monitoring and more scrutiny, if the AI can or can't be allowed into the court.
Well, I look at it from a slightly different angle, because of course none of these AI developments or technology developments in the last 30 years were ever explicitly to assist in the detection or prosecution of crime. It was always a pure sidewind. I mean, the most obvious is, for example, with mobile telephones and the need for Vodafone and the rest of them to effectively bill their clients. And the police authorities quickly realized that this technology that allowed companies to bill every month accurately for calls and texts and what have you had a police function inbuilt in it. They could access this material, and I don't think the police were particularly interested in the phone bill of a particular criminal, but they wanted to know where he was at a particular time. And it revolutionized the prosecution of crime. I cannot recall a case, certainly in the last 15 years, where phone evidence has not been front and center. It is always, always front and center. Every murder case, every drugs case, every serious criminal case involving more than one defendant communicating with a co-defendant will always, always have a phone expert that, I mean, Jay will know that there's a formula now. They have these particular type of maps that routinely are presented to juries. In fact, in the murder I'm doing at the moment, it's become so routine now that the phone industry and the prosecuting authorities have agreed a set formula of words as to what a phone mast does and doesn't do, that there's now a 2-page summary that is exhibited to a jury, and they don't bother calling an expert anymore. Prosecuting counsel just reads it as an agreed document, and the jury, within minutes of sitting, become 2-week experts on phone traffic. I mean, had they gone to the police as the technology was developed, I'm sure they could have improved on it from a policing perspective, but of course that wasn't necessary to Vodafone. And once they got the protocol in place as to what the police were entitled to access and deploy, and of course alongside that, with the development of computers and ANPR cameras, I mean, again, the murder I'm doing at the moment is no different from the murder I did last month or the one I did the month before that. Is once you get the ANPR registration number, the police instantly access then the registration plate to Swansea to determine, is this a stolen car, a cloned car, or is it actually registered to the guy on trial. Then they instantly access the mobile phone to see if it's a contract, a pay-as-you-go, or a burner phone. And literally a police officer sitting at a computer can make tremendous strides in investigating crime without even going and interviewing a witness. I mean, my 6-week murder, we had 3 civilian witnesses. That's all, just 3, who only highlighted how bad human beings are at being witnesses. We had 3 people who saw the shooting. The forensic evidence was beyond dispute. 8 shots were fired. In a crowded street, we had 3 witnesses. One said 4 shots were fired, one said 6 shots were fired, and one said 5 shots were fired. And they were all convinced they were right. In fact, they were all...
So doesn't bring us to the question about positive and negative aspects of this technology.
It is more reliable. Somebody did I read somewhere a while ago that a computer program determined that eyewitness testimony, in other words, 3 people attending an identification parade and purporting to identify someone they saw do something wrong yesterday, a week ago, or 2 weeks ago. The odds are they're more likely to be wrong than they are to be right. I mean,
so where does that leave us?
Camera, it's infinitely better than an eyewitness.
So I guess the question back to Jay, because you wrote in your piece for the book, which was excellent, quite a bit about your hope for AI being an improvement on somewhat occasionally biased police officer in a hurry who might be tempted to, fall on his stereotypes. And you were quite explicit about your hope for using that technology to debias and restruct and bring some rational objectivity, data-like to the case. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
So I think, going on from what Trevor is saying, that as individuals, we are now cataloging so much more digital evidence than ever before, and through our phones, through the calls we make, through to the interactions with all sorts of devices, from televisions to cars, we are unknowingly cataloging so much information. And when you come, I think Trevor was absolutely spot on. When you come to the digital forensic evidence in crimes, actually that digital evidence is far more reliable than anything else. And actually, you probably don't even need to look at so much eyewitness statement, because the evidence is there from lots of available sources, from ANPR to CCTV recordings. These are things that somebody in the back office can actually catalog and obtain, and actually just present it to an arresting officer to say, okay, here's the evidence, go and arrest that person. And one of the things is that's really important when we're using AI tools we have to make sure we avoid the biases. And that's where it's quite important on how we train AI tools. Now, if you're training it based on historical data, and that historical data contains any form of racial bias, for example, or any data that could be prejudiced in any way, then actually that's the same results you're going to get. And actually, AI is an opportunity for us to be able to improve the thinking around it. It gives you that powerful secondary insight. I think human intelligence is still really powerful, but actually sometimes when it comes to decision making, the way I see AI at the moment, it's a secondary insight. It's there to support you. However, I always believe that you should still be questioning the accuracy of the AI from what I've seen, especially around what the data sources are. If you don't know how it's been trained, you don't know what data source it's using, then how do you know it's giving you a fair and balanced view of the world if you're trying to make a decision? And I think that's really important when you're looking at crimes or using AI tools to analyze evidence. What algorithm is it using? Who's trained it? And if it's someone who's trained it with a certain set of views, then is it giving you that certain set of view around it? And that's the bit here that we have to really measure against.
John, I think you had something to add here.
Yes, I do. There's a book that I read recently by Kashmir Hill, who also used to be a legal journalist, called Your Face Belongs to Us. And there was a case in America in that of a mistaken identity of facial recognition, where a man was arrested for stealing jewelry in a shop that he had been into previously, but he wasn't actually the criminal. He was misidentified by facial recognition from the CCTV camera. And they actually were so convinced it was him, they came and arrested him outside his house. And in the end, he got a lot of compensation, but he lost his job because of it. And because he was arrested and taken away. And this guy had been somewhere else. He'd been out to dinner with his wife or something. He was completely not there. It wasn't like he was also in the shop. But when they sifted through the CCTV camera, they saw someone and they thought it was him. When you put the two together, they didn't look alike. So it was a glitch in the algorithm, and he was nearly put away for it. He had to get a lawyer. And there's a lot of situations like that of potential mistaken identity, especially when it comes to the photography thing. So one example that when we did the prep call, but you weren't there, Jay, so I found one that was funny. This one was completely not funny. This was basically his life was very badly affected by it, and compensation wasn't going to put him back where he was before, because he was also, it got to him psychologically. But there was one in the UK where there was this woman, and she was wearing a sweater with knitter on it, as in KNITTER, because she liked knitting. And she was crossing a road, and she was crossing the road, I don't know, in the wrong place. And this couple whose number plate was KN1LL something got an automatic fine because the traffic camera, this was in the UK, actually mistook the right for a number plate. So she was a bit upset about being mistaken for a car driving in the bus lane. But that is the kind of mistake that only AI makes. Like, the person might not count 5 shots because they might have missed the first one. They weren't expecting a shot. So the first bang, they didn't realize was shooting. And then when they heard the next shots, they would realize that it was, whereas a recording would tell you, because you watched it several times, that there were in fact 8 and the person only heard 5 of them. But that's partly because of expectations and humanity, but then because of expectations and lack of humanity, I mean, I wouldn't be that happy if my sweatshirt mistook me for a bus, but I wouldn't think a woman in a sweatshirt was a car, and neither would any of the rest of us. So there's a complexity here, and I wondered, as policing experts and judges working on these trials using this sort of evidence, what you thought about it.
Well, I haven't done many breaching a bus lane cases in recent, but as I understand it, I mean, Jayan will know, I think you get the automatic fixed penalty. If you dispute it, they will actually show you the photograph.
That's what they did.
I think you have to request.
That's right.
The simplest way to do this is, as you send out the fixed summons, you send the photograph. Because the moment somebody determines, well, we're sending a fixed penalty to Mr. and Mrs. whoever, the minute they see the photograph of a woman in a sweater as opposed to a car with four wheels, somebody would immediately appreciate the error. But presumably this is all absolutely automated, Jay, and there's no human input to this at all.
There's a challenge here in that actually that you can imagine within government and policing that there's resourcing constraints and funding restrictions. So using automation and these AI tools is actually what you're going to need to do. However, even what you have now in terms of automation, yes, these cameras will click, process it back end, and actually some will now send you a little clip of the video where it allows you to see, okay, whether or not I actually did this before you decide to dispute it. So it is fully automated. The amount of people who get these letters, for someone to sit there individually and go through them is not efficient enough. You could get AI to double check that actually, is it a vehicle and was it right? But you're right, a lot of this is automated. So there is this element of using AI to analyze what has been automated to check whether or not it's valid, which sounds a bit odd in its order, but you're almost going to get to that point. The other thing I would say here in that, in terms of crimes where you gave the example of mistaken identity, in that, imagine you are using deep fake technology to replace certain people in either stills or footage, or even creating new videos with them on social media and things. And we're already seeing it today. Imagine if you're facing a criminal case where actually somebody's said that is you and everything else is, wow, that really does look like me. How do you now verify that these people are who they say they are? How do you discern what's real and what's not? And I think that's where the human element now really steps up, because if you're unsure, you now need to create more of that physical human interaction with people rather than trying to distance. Because automation, AI is great because you can do things back office and do things without actually having to travel to the people. However, if you're not sure and you think that technology has played a big part in some of this, how do you verify that person you're talking to is the person? You won't at some point. That human interaction is going to be a massively important part going forward.
Well, of course, that's inevitably the problem. If you look at the whole, the crisis with a lot of this technology that we see in the post office scandal at the moment is it's the failure of a human to disclose to the defense there is a potential problem in the technology. None of these postmasters or postmistresses who said, look, we never stole this money, all of their trials would have been entirely different if Horizon had fezzed up and the post office had disclosed at the outset, there is in certain circumstances a glitch which permits this or that to happen. Had that been disclosed, which was a human decision not to, was a lawyer or somebody within the post office who said, actually, no, or Horizon who wanted to maintain some proprietary interest or secret in their technology, maybe weren't telling the post office, but these were human decisions. And it's a little like the potential facial recognition technology. again, I see nothing wrong with it. If juries and defendants and their lawyers are told the complete truth, which would allow an expert to contribute from the other side of the spectrum. For example, in a facial ID piece of software, the only way it could be effectively challenged is if there's full disclosure of the limited database in the memory of the equipment. For example, if it was a Chinese suspect, but the technology did not have more than a minimum number of Chinese features in its facility, most experts would say this is not good enough to be able to identify a Chinese citizen or a black male or a white woman, because we haven't got 10 million features in the database. Then it's perfectly credible evidence, as long as the defence have the opportunity to meet it with an expert saying, well, it's not reliable in this particular case for the following reason. Then a jury are equipped to make a decision. But it's the failure of a human to disclose the defect, the potential defects in the technology that leads to the problems we've had thus far. And they're only going to get worse, because I can see people like Horizon say, well, we've invested millions in this technology. We do not want to disclose in a criminal trial how this technology works, or one of our competitors will do exactly what we're trying to do or have done. So I can see it is a potential problem going forward. And of course, as is always, this stuff is never developed for the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system piggyback, for their own benefit, technology designed for a completely different purpose, because there's no money in solving crime. There's no startup making money locking criminals up. Where's the money in that? There isn't any.
So we probably should focus on that, how we can support the development of correct tools. We had a long conversation, a workshop with British Computer Science Organization, which is very keen on reviewing that area, because the guy who specified Horizon was a chartered member of BSc, and they still haven't kicked him out because the jury is still out, as they say. But it has somehow got through the conversation that it was Fujitsu who were not keen on disclosure because they're Japanese and they don't like being embarrassed. You know, like God knows what was going on in this case. But can I ask a question, sort of coming back to the positives, where I think we have few examples of the risks and threats, but Jayan, in your essay, you mentioned also small glimpse of hope, that taking away the drudgery, taking away the admin, taking away all the non-inspiring parts of policing might actually allow you to recruit better quality people, might attract people who will know, right, you know, I won't have to be writing reports for 24/7. There is tech that will admin, and I can spend, how did you put it, like Hercules Poirot, thinking about nuanced parts of the investigation. So could you elaborate on that hope of improving the police recruitment?
Yes. So on my attachment with the police force to see how they operate in that real world, I did spend some time with somebody who actually spent almost 24 hours looking at CCTV data just to identify when a suspect might have gone down a particular high street or whatever. And they were literally just watching a video all day long, pretty much. And if you had AI to do this, or do it a lot quicker for you, you can imagine how much time gets saved. That's such valuable time of a police officer saved, hours and hours of it, because they've got tools doing this for them. There is the accuracy of it, and there might be things that get missed. However, it's just the fact that you've got such valuable police time not being utilized in the right way. So you can imagine that if you're giving them the tools to say, okay, we now will take away that pain of these tasks that are normally time consuming to go through and sift data to analyze this record. You're able to use tools to do that for you. You can actually now use that more intelligent. You can use your time more intelligently and efficiently to say, actually, you know what? I'm not here to go through all these reams and reams of information. I'm here to analyze. I'm here to use my skills. This is what I'm here for. And therefore, if you haven't got good technology and you're having to go through some really long procedures of things, is it the job for you? You know, you're getting these new people coming through into policing. We're not retaining them for long nowadays,
Yes,
and
that
that's
was
the
a very
challenge.
good, that was a very good point you made, that the new generation of police recruits are all, you know, fast thumbs and used
Yeah.
to spend 10,000 hours playing games, and they look at the equipment and technologies like, is that what we've got to work with? And they are the ones who are pushing the acceptance, because they can see intuitively, possibly, what should work, and they're very miffed that it doesn't.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised. I'm surprised the police. I mean, the case I finished in Birmingham a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, the actual murder in a rave, a sort of very crowded nightclub, with all the lighting difficulties you can imagine in your strobe lighting and all that sort of stuff. I think the team of officers who did the 12-hour spread of CCTV coverage, getting the victim and the suspects to the venue and departing the venue. If I remember correctly, the evidence was led that it was 600 man hours. 600 man hours and countless CCTV downloads that this team had to process and get it into a formula that was presentable to a jury. And I think all the clips tied together was about 40 minutes, as I remember correctly, with still photographs and all the rest of it.
But can I just come back to Joanna, because you also mentioned last time your thoughts about you know, is that technology going to make us safer or not? Is it going to be improvement or not? As a technologist and a writer, where do you sit on where is that progress, or is that going to just cause more trouble?
Well, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I mean, again, I share Jaden's hope that it will be better, because if you can see on what's going on CCTV and you really can see it, then maybe you can help. But the problem is, you're only looking at that after the event, so it's not going to prevent anything. It's just, it may improve eventually access to justice. I mean, I had a friend who was mugged on the tube and they saw it on CCTV. So, but that didn't stop it happening. She still got mugged. So there's that side of it. I think in terms of, I mean, I've been writing about technology for 16 years. So obviously I'm in favor of it because of that. And if you look at things like the pandemic, I mean, it lets everybody work from home, and it allows people to have the data in front of them to make decisions. So, for example, in the courts or lawyers, they can have the data in front of them when they're working on it. They don't have to go and look for it. Ditto with the CCTV. If you can have it in court, if you can improve the search, which is where generative AI is going to be really good. It's good at looking for stuff, basically, so long as it's well trained. I think it will work. I think the danger is injustice. I mean, there's other things where it's good. It's good on forensics. It's caused a lot of fraud. I went to the fraud conference where we actually learned how to clone voices. That was fun. So now we can all do fraud. And, yeah, so it's quite straightforward. And so the thing is, when you have developments in technology, they're used for good and they're used for harm. So there's always someone who's going to find a bad way to use it, like cloning people and putting them on videos, like making clones of people's voices. Again, then you can do technology that can tell if it's the real one or it's a clone, because there's fine features. And in the end, it's going to be transformative. The hope is that it'll produce a better access to justice in terms of speed. So when you see things in the news, you see a murder trial happen of the sort that Trevor does do, not like traffic offences, and you say, oh, in 2021, this is what happened. And then you go, well, this is 3 years later, they've finally been brought to justice. They could have been, I don't know if they've been put away when they may or may not have done it, if they've been locked up, or if they haven't been locked up and they have done it, they've had an extra 3 years to be out murdering.
Well, I can put your mind at rest, Joanna. Almost everyone accused of murder is refused bail.
Good.
So, with a
only good if they're actually guilty.
Yeah, good if they've done it. But
it's fine if they're guilty, but if they're not guilty, of course, you can do almost 2 years on remand now, with the backlog and the pandemic and all that. But I don't know if it's your experience, Joanna or JN or even Eva, but I just think the general public are so trusting of any advances in technology. They don't question it in the way that we as professionals do. That's why so many poor, unfortunate victims of fraud get a phone call and they fizz up their bank details with the minimum of prompting by somebody who's obviously calling from a call center on some basis that, if you think about it, doesn't make much sense. And people are having their bank accounts stripped because people trust technology.
I think it's a matter of generation, Trevor, because there is a lot of research showing that people who are of Daily Mail generation, they trust what's written. People who came to technology when email started trust email. And then kids who are now coming to Snapchat, they think that Snapchat is true, although Snapchat is very fakeable. So, I think the medium is the message. But you're right, people, we look for tools and conveniences. And if something is convenient, we use it and we think about the rest of our lives later. But can I come back to just sort of to wrap up slightly? The technologies that have been accepted and very successful, as you mentioned, Trevor, in your essay, fingerprinting came in 1901, and as far as I know, it's pretty damn accurate, and I can't hear many disagreements about that. Then DNA, which came about 30 years ago, again, that appears to be accepted on the scientific grounds with pretty much 99% accuracy or 100%. This technology is a little bit different because the other two technologies, they didn't promise, as Joanna mentioned, that they will save us. They were just tools that you can use after the fact. This technology is going around promising that it will save everything and everybody and money and improve fairness and biases. But actually, it's a different technology because it's a predictive technology. So there is a whole bunch of new paradigms about it because it's about predictability and plausibility and probability, which are very subjective. For one person, what's plausible, for somebody else might be probable. And you're off to the races, in a very ethereal estimates of stuff. So the question is, I guess, Jane, how do you bring your new digital native shiny police officers, the new generation, to have that in mind, that this is not fingerprinting, this is not DNA, this is still very much work in progress?
I think a lot of people don't realize they're already using AI. There's so many tools already out there from Netflix. They use AI in terms of the search and how much they know about you. So in many ways, we're already using it. In terms of the new digital natives coming into policing, yes, they have a high expectation of using these tools.
But the idea that you could ever predict a crime and get there just in time to stop it, I think that really still is science fiction. AI at the moment can detect and prosecute a past crime. No one is suggesting that we should advance the law to lock people up before they commit the crime based on some AI prediction that you're just the sort who would. I mean, that's a big
But
leap.
is that true, Trevor? Because I looked quite a bit following Joanna's suggestions last week. I looked a lot in the cases on predictive policing in a way that, you know, they send the teams to particularly high crime areas because predictive policing analytics tells them to send people. And lo and behold, they will pick few people up just because they're there. If they send them somewhere else, they probably would have picked the same amount of people up somewhere else. So it's kind of like, you know, the technology forces certain allocation of resources. These resources have to justify what they're doing there, and you end up more feeding the back AI. Yeah, we
can
more
see
people there. Let's go to Brixton.
I don't think you need a multi-million-pound piece of equipment to tell you that if you want to stop drug dealing in Bethnal Green, then the underpass near a tower block of flats is probably where it's going to take place. So you don't need a computer. An experienced policeman policing Bethnal Green could probably on the back of a cigarette box give you 10 venues where drugs will be dealt at 10 o'clock tonight. And if they pitch up in sufficient numbers, they'll catch the drug dealers. You don't need a computer to tell you that.
Well, I think if you follow up what our current incoming prime minister is suggesting, he will be picking every single one of them up, because he is saying that we will be more specific on the small and petty crime, i.e. graffiti and small drug dealing. So, Jayan, you'll be very busy with the incoming new overlords.
Well, that will certainly prove more popular, because for people's day-to-day lives, that's what they want sorted. They want burglaries, car theft, antisocial behaviour. That impacts. I mean, I think Keir Starmer has got a rich vein of support for that. Much more so than.
But do we have space if we start arresting more people? Do we have anywhere to put them? Because I'm hearing we haven't got space in the prison, so we're letting people out.
Here we'll have to have them all stay in his house, I'm afraid, whilst they
right. So I guess that's where we could use AI to, you know, match the appetites for tough on crime with the capacity of where to hold the criminals, because at the moment we seem to be like, you know, going the wrong directions. Okay, so just to wrap it up, I guess, so what would be your wish, JN, for the next 10 years? I won't go into politics, whichever government we will serve the government of the day, but what would be your wish for the incoming government of whatever shade it will be to help out your work?
So we recognize the resource constraints and also funding restrictions within policing. It's so difficult. Not many people are staying in policing as they used to be. Technology plays a very important part in that. We need to invest more in technology and utilizing these tools in a much better way. But we've got to use it right. We've got to regulate it right. We must test this. And test, you know, until we almost can't test anymore with this to make sure the accuracy of data, because, you know, what you don't want is any setback using these tools. And that will really help things going forward. You know, the waiting time almost for cases, or even for people to even hear back from police. You know, you could automate so much more work. You could actually have so much more back office functions that, you know, is gathering a lot of digital evidence to help support crimes, having a better utilization of resources. My fear going forward is that as you do this, it's creating that over-reliance on AI output, that we become to a point where you're relying on what it says rather than our own intuition to question whether or not it's right. You know, it's getting that you get to a point where you think, yeah, okay, I've used this tool and it's told me this, I'm going to go with that. You know, where's our own judgment going to play?
A lot in that book, a lot of the writers that you guys work with were of that ilk, that if you don't examine it, you won't be aware of the mistakes. So if I can get the same question to Joanna, you've been watching that beast growing and embracing us. So what would be your wish and fear?
You know, I watch the technology and I also watch the news. And I think that the police has a problem with trust. I think they could use a lot more resources for their recruitment so that they get the right people these days, because the police have, there's been quite a lot of disgraceful incidents with them. So I think that's they could use a bit of the technology to do that, so that they could actually background check the people that they recruit, because it's they in the olden days you used to feel, especially as a woman, safe if you went to, you could call a police officer. I have to say I don't. So that's the first thing. So there's the technology there. I think again we have to be careful about things like facial recognition. You only have to read Kashmir Hill's book. I think there you could have a human in the loop. So with the technology that I do write about, that's for legal and professional services, that is enterprise tech, so they can afford to have really cool back office stuff, because they're professional services, so they have cool back office stuff. It does take out the grunt work, so that the lawyers, for example, they have client onboarding, so that they have they can onboard their client, and then they can concentrate on actually the legal advice, not the back office functionality. I think the way that things can work in the judiciary, where there's some cases that they can deal with remotely, so they can have some remote hearings. Now, in mental health cases, that's much safer for the judge than having to go into a mental hospital, prison, a secure environment. Actually go in there is a bit much to ask. And people who are not well and not balanced sometimes are better if they're speaking in their own room than being dragged into a courtroom. So I think that a lot of cases can be better handled using technology. That's not AI. With AI, it's just, you can gain efficiencies. You don't have to question things all the time, but you have to have a human in the loop, because AI makes its own mistakes. We make our own mistakes, but it thinks differently, and it's great for sifting through stuff, and it's also great for sifting through footage and other things. But you need to check the outputs and make sure that not too much goes out that's wrong, that you don't turn too many people wearing a t-shirt into a number plate, because again you'll lose the trust. But to keep a human in the loop, so that the security systems are more reliable and trustworthy, because they're overseen better. So that's my hope, is that we can combine the human skills and traits with the time-saving technology.
Great, thank you very much. And Trevor, what can you leave us with?
My only contribution would be, we won't be able, nor try to stop the advances of technology, but as the post office scandal is exposing daily now, there is an increased obligation, the more we use it, to make full and frank disclosure to the courts and the defence and all interested parties that there are potential problems with it. I don't have a problem with technology being deployed, as long as we know it's not foolproof if it isn't foolproof. And this trying to protect the proprietary rights of the inventor, I'm afraid we have to sacrifice that if we wish to deploy it in the criminal justice system in particular. And the quicker people come to realise that, the better. And I saw somebody made a contribution that until you make the people responsible for these disclosure decisions liable to a prison sentence if they fail, they're not going to do it. And I'm sure if anyone working in the post office 10 years ago who sat on this, if anyone did sit on it, if they knew, well, actually I could go to jail for 3 years for this, it may well have focused the attention much sharper. And maybe that is the way forward. We need penalties if there are subsequent discoveries that undermine the conviction of what were wholly innocent people. The penalty for that isn't particularly severe now.
Yes, that's a very good point. And also the tech stack is getting thicker and more intransparent because, when we moved to the cloud, we lost the understanding of the layers, intermediate layers, because everybody plugs to everything like that. So nobody really owns the whole stack. I mean, there was no excuses for Fujitsu because they were doing in the days when they owned the full stack, and they should have known, and they did know. But today, with the best will in the universe, you are putting together Lego from often hundreds of components. And, it might be fine on the day of the final testing, JN, but a week later, one of the components updates and one of the components doesn't work with other components, and you have a new glitch. So unfortunately, we have to allocate resource for ongoing testing, because the fact that it was good on Monday doesn't mean it will be equally good on Tuesday. It's just too many components. We're fighting with that a bit because the cloud was cheaper. It's cheaper, but it also is much more intransparent. And also the gaps in technology. I think that's something that, Trevor, you explained to us, and I followed up with the automated number plate recognition. How many people are selling ways to confuse it? There are sprays, there are blockers. They're like, oh my God, the market for that. When I looked at it, this is obviously where it's hot. So the fact that the system thinks you were not there doesn't actually mean you were not there, because you might have been there, but covered with spray that reflects the camera. So I think understanding of the fact that, the ring of steel around London is not quite what it's cracked up to be. And I know that it's nice to think that something is in place, but it's kind of something somewhere. It's not everything everywhere all the time, as in the movie. It's few things even there from time to time. And I think the police will have to, embrace the elements they can. But you're absolutely right, Jay, and they're relying on any of this 100% without good human oversight. It's just a road to nowhere. But thank you very much, guys. That was a fantastic conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope that we leave you with few thoughts to digest. And yes, it will be an interesting ride for all of us. But for those on the front line of really life and death situations like Trevor, JN, and the journalists cover it, it will be a big challenge. But we can meet it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.